When Copper Wires Sang. The prologue, The Whisper in the Wire. Imagine a world draped in the golden hue of oil lamps and the rhythmic clatter of horse carriages on cobblestone streets. It's 1840, and the air smells of coal smoke and ambition. People thought the fastest thing on earth was a galloping horse or a puffing steam engine. They were wrong. Deep in a dimly lit room, a man named Samuel Morse is staring at a strange wooden contraption, his fingers trembling with a secret that would shrink the world forever. Suddenly, the silence of the room is shattered by a frantic, rhythmic clicking. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't just noise. It was the first heartbeat of a digital ghost. This was the moment humanity learned to speak through lightning. But don't think it was all serious business and tall hats. Picture a frantic clerk, his wig slightly crooked from stress, trying to translate a lover's secret poem into dots and dashes while his boss yells about tea. It was chaotic, it was revolutionary, and it was the start of a madness that would make your modern-day lagging look like a luxury. This wasn't just a machine. It was the birth of the first internet, and boy was it about to get messy. Dirty Ma. Chapter 1. The Paper Trail and the Pigeon Panic. The year is 1830, and the world is moving at the speed of a very tired horse. If you wanted to tell your cousin in the next city that you liked their new hat, you had to write it on a piece of parchment, seal it with wax, and hand it to a man in a red coat who would then disappear into the sunset for 3 days. It was slow, it was dusty, and if the horse got a cramp, your gossip was as good as dead. In the heart of London, people were obsessed with the post. But there was a problem. The mail didn't just carry letters, it carried chaos. Imagine a bustling post office where thousands of pigeons are kept in cages as a backup system. One morning, a clumsy clerk named Barnaby, who had more ambition than balance, accidentally tripped over a mop bucket. In his panic to stay upright, he yanked the lever to the pigeon coop. Suddenly, the sky inside the post office turned into a cloud of gray feathers and frantic cooing. Letters meant for the Queen were being snatched up by birds who thought the wax seals were snacks. It was a feathered riot. While Barnaby was running around with a butterfly net and a look of pure terror, the elite of society were standing outside, tapping their pocket watches, wondering why their instant mail was currently being pooped on by a pigeon named Percy. This was the high-speed era. People were desperate. They realized that relying on wings and hooves was making the world feel far too large. In the middle of this feathery disaster, a few brilliant, slightly eccentric minds were watching the lightning in the sky and thinking, what if we could make the spark do the talking instead of the bird? Little did they know, they were about to turn a wire into a tongue that could speak across oceans, leaving poor Barnaby and his pigeons in the literal dust. That was just the warm-up. The birds are gone, and the electricity is about to hit the wires. Should I move on to Chapter 2, The Click-Clack Revolution, where we meet the man who turned... Chapter 2. The Click-Clack Revolution. The year is 1837, and the air is thick with the smell of ozone and burnt coffee. Samuel Morse is sitting in a cramped basement, surrounded by tangled copper wires that look like a giant metallic spiderweb. He isn't a scientist. He's a painter who got tired of waiting weeks for letters that told him his dinner was cold. Beside him is Alfred Vail, a man who treats machines like they are his own children. Together, they are trying to do the impossible, make a wire talk. Imagine the tension in that room. Outside, the world is still riding horses. But inside, Morse is tapping a small brass key. Tap, 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 tap. It sounds like a woodpecker with a nervous breakdown. Every time he hits that key, a spark jumps across the room, traveling through miles of wire wrapped around the walls. This wasn't just noise. This was the birth of a secret code that would change history. But of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. At one point, Alfred accidentally leaned his elbow on the live wire and did a little dance that looked suspiciously like a modern disco move, sending a message to the other end that translated to quote, 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 AARGH. The neighbors thought they were conjuring ghosts. They saw these two men staring at a piece of paper where a pen was wildly drawing dots and dashes. People whispered that they were using magic to trap voices in the metal. But Morse just smiled, his eyes gleaming with the mischief of a man who knew he was about to make every pigeon in the world unemployed. When the first real message finally traveled from Washington to Baltimore, What hath God wrought? It wasn't just a miracle. It was the moment the world realized that distance was now just a myth. The wires were humming, the clerks were frantic, and the click-clack revolution had officially begun to scream across the land. Story end. Chapter 3. The Ocean's Deep Secret. The year is 1858, and the Atlantic Ocean is looking particularly grumpy. Imagine two massive wooden steamships, the Agamemnon and the Niagara, bobbing like corks in a washing machine. Between them, they are carrying a cable that looks like a very long, very expensive black snake. This isn't just any wire, it's the lifeline that's supposed to connect Europe and America. For the first time in history, someone had the crazy idea to lay a copper wire across 2,000 miles of dark, freezing, and very salty abyss. On board, the sailors are skeptical. They are looking at the scientists like they've spent too much time in the sun. "You want to talk to London through the fish?" one salty old captain asked, his pipe smoke swirling in the wind. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a rusty anchor. Every time the cable snaps, and it snaps a lot, the engineers look like they want to jump in after it. At one point, a young technician named Arthur tried to fix a kink in the line and ended up getting his suspenders caught in the giant winch. He was nearly hoisted into the air like a human kite, screaming in a very high-pitched voice that definitely wasn't part of the Morse code. But then, the miracle happened. Deep beneath the waves, where giant squids were probably wondering why a giant black noodle was falling on their heads, the signal pulsed. 2,000 miles away, a needle flickered. Click? Click-clack. The Queen of England sent a message to the President of the United States. It took 16 hours to transmit 98 words, which is slower than a snail on a coffee break. But it was a revolution. People in New York went absolutely wild, setting off fireworks and accidentally burning down a part of City Hall in their excitement. They didn't care about the speed. They cared that for the first time, the internet had crossed the uncrossable sea. The ocean's secret was out. Even the deepest water couldn't keep a good gossip down. Story end. Chapter 4. The Cyber Spies and Secret Codes. The year is 1865, and the world has officially gone wire crazy. Every city is now draped in copper, and the telegraph offices are the new town squares. But here's the thing. When you send a message through a wire, a clerk has to read it. And clerks, being human, are the nosiest creatures on the planet. Imagine a young, bored operator named Percival, a man with a very sharp ear and a very weak moral compass. He's sitting in a dusty office in Paris, sipping his lukewarm tea, and he hears a series of clicks that sound suspiciously like a stock market tip. Suddenly, the first internet wasn't just for saying "I love you" or "send more cheese." It became a playground for the world's first hackers. Bankers started using secret codes to hide their millions. A message would arrive saying, quote, "The blue cat sleeps on the red rug," which actually meant, "Sell all the gold before the king finds out he's broke." Percival and his friends spent their nights trying to crack these codes, huddled over flickering candles like digital pirates. One night, they accidentally intercepted a message that they thought was a military coup, only to realize after 3 hours of intense decoding that it was just a very angry grandmother complaining about the price of cabbage in Lyon. The chaos didn't stop there. Governments realized that if they could tap a wire, they could win wars without firing a single bullet. They started sending phantom messages to confuse their enemies. Imagine a general receiving a telegram saying his reinforcements are coming from the north, while in reality, they are having a picnic in the south. The wires were no longer just copper. They were veins of secrets and lies. It was a game of cat and mouse played with lightning. People began to realize that in this new connected world, a secret was only a secret, until someone with a pair of pliers and a curious mind decided to listen in. The age of privacy was dying, and the age of the cyber spy was dancing on its grave with a mischievous grin. Story end. Chapter 5. The Wedding Wire and the Runaway Bride. The year is 1874, and the telegraph is no longer just for the rich and the powerful. It has become the world's first dating app, but with a lot more clicking and a lot less swiping. People are falling in love through the hum of the wires without ever seeing each other's faces. Imagine a young, dramatic telegraph operator named Barnaby, not the pigeon tripper from before, but a hopeless romantic with a very shaky mustache. He's been tapping sweet nothings to a mysterious operator named Clara, who lives 300 miles away in a foggy town called Bristol. They decided to do the unthinkable, a telegraph wedding. The priest was in London, the groom was in Manchester, and the bride was in Bristol. It was the world's first virtual ceremony. The priest tapped out the vows, and the wires hummed with "I do." But here's the catch. Just as the final amen was being transmitted, a stray cow in a field near Birmingham decided that the telegraph pole looked like a very tasty scratching post. With one giant itchy rub, the cow knocked the wire loose. The message "I do" got garbled into "I don't like your hat." Clara, hearing this through her receiver, gasped in horror. She thought Barnaby had developed cold feet and a sudden hatred for her lace bonnet. She burst into tears, grabbed her suitcase, and ran out of the office, accidentally knocking over a bucket of ink. Meanwhile, poor Barnaby was staring at his silent machine, wondering why his new wife had suddenly ghosted him in Morse code. He spent the next 6 hours frantically tapping. It was the cow, but the line was dead. It took 3 days, 2 carriage rides, and one very confused cow for them to finally meet in person. When they did, Barnaby didn't say a word. He just tapped the "I love you" code on her hand with his knuckles. The wedding was back on, the cow was forgiven, and the world realized that while the internet could connect hearts, it could also break them with a single itchy bovine. Story end. Chapter 6. The Ghost in the Machine. The year is 1882, and the nights are fog-heavy and silent. Telegraph offices have become lonely outposts where the only sound is the rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat of the brass keys. Operators began to report something bone-chilling. Late at night, when the lines were supposed to be empty, the machines would start clicking on their own. It wasn't a message from London or New York. It was a series of slow, deliberate taps that didn't follow any known code. Imagine a young operator named Silas, sitting in a remote station in the mountains. The wind is howling outside, and suddenly, his machine starts to chatter. Tap. Tap, tap, pause. Silas froze. He reached for his manual, his lantern flickering as the oil ran low. He tapped back. "Who is there?" The machine replied instantly, with a rhythmic vibration that felt like a cold shiver. The townspeople started whispering that the copper wires were actually spirit lines, and that the souls of those who died while the messages were traveling were now trapped inside the humming metal. One night, Silas was so terrified that he invited the local baker, a man named Hugo who feared nothing but burnt crusts, to sit with him. As they watched, the key began to dance. Hugo, being a man of action, grabbed a heavy iron wrench, convinced there was a tiny, invisible thief hiding under the table. He swung the wrench with a roar, accidentally smashing Silas's favorite porcelain teapot instead of a ghost. But as the tea spilled, they noticed something strange. The ghostly clicking stopped the moment a small, wet squirrel scurried out from a hole in the floorboard. The poor creature had been chewing on the insulated wires, and every time it got a tiny static shock, its little paws would twitch against the metal lever. The ghost in the machine wasn't a spirit from the beyond. It was just a very confused, very caffeinated squirrel named Nutty, who had accidentally learned a bit of Morse code. Silas sighed in relief. Hugo felt silly with his wrench, and the world realized that while the internet could be spooky, most of its demons just had bushy tails and a taste for copper. Story end. Ha ha ha. Chapter 7. The Great News Race. The year is 1890, and information has become more valuable than gold. In the dusty, ink-stained offices of Fleet Street in New York, editors are screaming, "Get me the wire!" The world has become a giant racetrack, and the finish line is a tiny copper key. Imagine 2 rival journalists, Barnaby, a man who wears 3 waistcoats and never sleeps, and Silas, who has a twitchy eye and a very fast horse. They are both waiting at a remote port for a ship coming from Europe, with the news of a royal scandal that could shake empires. The ship docks, and the race begins. Barnaby jumps onto his horse, clutching a satchel of notes, while Silas tries to take a shortcut through a muddy swamp. Barnaby reaches the nearest telegraph station first, his face covered in soot and sweat. He slams a gold coin on the desk and yells at the operator, "Send this to London now!" But Silas, who is surprisingly sneaky for a man in a top hat, has already reached the station's back window. He sneaks in, and, while the operator is busy with Barnaby, he subtly cuts the wire with a pair of silver scissors. Barnaby is tapping away, thinking he's a hero, while Silas is outside, frantically tying his own portable telegraph kit to the other end of the cut wire. It was the world's first live breaking news hijack. Barnaby was sending his scoop into thin air, while Silas was whispering the secrets of the Queen directly to the front pages of the morning paper. When Barnaby finally realized his wire was dead, he let out a scream that scared every crow for miles. He chased Silas through the streets, waving his cane like a madman, while the townspeople cheered. By the time the sun rose, Silas's paper was being sold on every corner, while Barnaby was still trying to untangle himself from a thorn bush. The internet had turned the world into a 24-hour news cycle, where being second meant you were invisible. It didn't matter if the news was true or if a squirrel had helped you write it. All that mattered was who reached the wire first. The era of slow news was dead, buried under a pile of discarded ink and the echoes of a very angry man in 3 waistcoats. Story end. Ha ha ha. Bichara. Chapter 8. The War of the Wires. The year is 1892, and the air in New York City is buzzing. Literally. You have Thomas Edison on one side, a man who loves his direct current, DC, like a father loves a stubborn child, and on the other side, the mysterious, lightning-taming genius Nikola Tesla. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was a full-blown war of the currents. Edison wanted the internet and the lights of the world to run on his wires, while Tesla had a vision of alternating current, AC, that could travel for hundreds of miles without breaking a sweat. Imagine Edison, standing on a wooden crate in the middle of a crowded street, trying to prove that Tesla's wires were dangerous. He'd point at a stray wire and tell everyone it would turn their toast into charcoal in 3 seconds. Meanwhile, Tesla was in his laboratory, calmly letting thousands of volts of electricity pass through his own body just to show off. He looked like a human glow stick, his hair standing on end like a startled porcupine, while he casually sipped his tea. The internet of that time, the telegraph, and the newfangled telephone, was caught in the middle. If you used Edison's wires, you needed a power station every few blocks, which meant the city looked like a giant bowl of copper spaghetti. If you used Tesla's, you could send a message across the state with just one thin line. One evening, a massive storm hit, and the 2 types of wires got tangled. The sky turned neon purple, and for 10 minutes, every telegraph machine in the city started playing a rhythmic beat that sounded suspiciously like a drum solo. People ran out of their houses, thinking the end of the world had arrived in a shower of sparks. But it was just the 2 geniuses clashing in the clouds. In the end, Tesla's long-distance vision won, but not before Edison had tried to convince everyone that AC stood for absolutely crazy. The wires were finally organized, the spaghetti was untangled, and the world realized that to connect everyone, you didn't just need a wire. You needed a spark that could travel forever. Story end. Chapter 9. The World in a Box. The year is 1895, and the world is covered in so much copper wire that birds are starting to complain they can't find a place to sit without getting a buzz. But in a quiet attic in Italy, a young man named Guglielmo Marconi is staring at a glass tube and a brass bell. He doesn't have a wire. He doesn't even have a string. He has something much more terrifying to the Victorian mind: invisible waves. Marconi believed that the air itself was a giant, invisible messenger, and he was determined to make it talk. Imagine his poor father, a man who just wanted a quiet dinner, watching his son throw sparks across the room without a single connection. "Guglielmo, you've gone mad," he probably shouted, while Marconi just smiled and tapped a key. Suddenly, a bell rang on the other side of the garden, 100 yards away. There was no wire, no string, just the silent, invisible pulse of the first wireless telegraph. It was as if Marconi had discovered a ghost that could carry letters. But the world wasn't ready. When Marconi went to England to show off his world in a box, the customs officers at the port were convinced he was a magician or a spy. They looked inside his wooden crates, expecting to find hidden wires or perhaps a very small, very fast-trained monkey. They even poked at his machines with umbrellas, half expecting a demon to pop out. "Where is the string, boy?" they barked, while Marconi just pointed at the sky and laughed. The first internet was no longer tied to the ground. It had grown wings. Suddenly, ships in the middle of the ocean, the same ones that used to be silent for weeks, could scream for help or tell the shore they were bringing extra pineapples. Marconi's box was small, but it held the entire world's voice inside it. People realized that soon, they wouldn't need miles of copper or angry cows scratching on poles. The wires were fading, the air was humming, and the era of the invisible web had truly begun, leaving the old telegraph clerks staring at their silent keys in wonder. Story end. Ha ha ha. Done. Chapter 10. The Digital Dawn. The year is now 1901, and the air is thick with invisible whispers. Marconi is standing on a cold, wind-swept cliff in Newfoundland, his ears straining against a heavy leather headphone. Across the vast, crashing waves of the Atlantic, a signal is being sent from England. It isn't a poem, or a stock tip, or a message about cabbage. It is just one single letter, repeated over and over. The letter S. 3 short clicks. Dot. 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 Through the roar of the storm and the static of the universe, that tiny sound traveled 3,000 miles without a single inch of wire. As that click hit Marconi's ear, the Victorian world took its final breath, and the modern age was born. Imagine the ghost of Samuel Morse and the frantic clerks of the past standing in the shadows, watching as their heavy copper chains dissolved into thin air. The first internet, the one made of steam, soot, and sweaty horses, was evolving. Those dots and dashes were the ancestors of your emojis, your video calls, and your viral dances. Every time you send a text today, you are actually echoing the heartbeat of that first rhythmic tap in a dusty basement. The world didn't just get smaller. It became a single room where everyone was talking at once. The pigeons went back to the parks, the cows went back to their grass, and the wires that once draped the cities like spiderwebs began to hide underground or vanish into the clouds. We moved from the click-clack of brass keys to the glow of glass screens. But even now, in this high-speed digital dawn, the magic remains the same. It's the human need to say, I am here, and I have something to tell you. As the sun sets on our story, the machines are silent, but the air is more alive than ever, carrying billions of secrets across the globe at the speed of light. The first internet didn't die, it just learned how to fly. Story end.